So imagine you're sitting in a 21st century boardroom. You've got the fluorescent lights just humming overhead, passive-aggressive emails pinging on your phone, and like a giant stack of HR policies you have to navigate just to get a single project approved.
Right, the classic modern Tuesday.
Exactly. But now, imagine trying to survive that exact boardroom using a brain that is wired exclusively to hunt woolly mammoths,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
right? Like foraging for tubers and just avoiding jaguar attacks. Today's author basically argues that this exact mismatch, this prehistoric operating system trying to run in a modern corporate high-rise, is the actual reason our society feels like it is, well, fundamentally tearing itself apart.
It's the ultimate collision, really, between our ancient biological hardware and our modern social software. And the argument here is that the hardware is winning.
It always does. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so thrilled you're joining us today. But before we get into the heavy lifting of this one, a really quick favor. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons right now.
It really is the best way to support the show.
Yeah, it helps us keep bringing you these deep dives every single week. So our mission today is a massive one. We are reviewing an explosive, ultra-long, and honestly just incisive new ebook titled Subversion of Female Instincts, E Syndrome, and the Recurring Fall.
By Sophie Marie Eve Riker.
That's the one. And I'll tell you right off the bat, if this deep dive hooks you, you should absolutely check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book for yourself.
Yeah, and make sure to follow the creator at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Definitely. Now, we do need to set some very clear ground rules for you before we go any further into this.
This is critical, yeah.
Because this book dives deep into some highly politically charged territory. I mean, it explores evolutionary psychology, explicit anti-feminism, and very sharp critiques of Marxism.
So, as always, we aren't here to take sides,
Right.
or to endorse or condemn the viewpoints presented.
Right. Our job is just to be your impartial guides. We're here to unpack the author's arguments objectively and help you understand the core ideas of the text.
Exactly. We're just looking under the hood at the mechanics of the argument.
So, what is the central thesis here? The author argues that modern society is suffering from this collective, civilization-wide psychosis that she calls Eve syndrome.
Right, and she defines this as a deliberate rebellion against biological reality and evolutionary gender roles.
And according to the text, this rebellion isn't just some accident. She says it's being actively driven by a historical alliance between modern feminism and cultural Marxism.
But to understand how she views the modern world, she insists we can't just start by, analyzing modern institutions.
We need to rewind the clock.
Way back, millions of years back, to the African savannah. She calls this the savannah consciousness.
Right, and to build this foundation, the book leans heavily on Charles Darwin, specifically his 1871 book, The Descent of Man.
A classic.
Yeah, and she posits that the fundamental driver of human behavior is sexual selection. So men engage in intersexual competition.
Meaning they fight each other for access.
Exactly. And women engage in intersexual selection, meaning they act as the gatekeepers, right? Choosing the superior males from the winners of that competition.
And the author makes it really clear that this dynamic isn't just some polite suggestion from history. It's a command written into our DNA.
Like hardwired.
Yeah. Without men's desperate ambition to demonstrate value and women's selective nature filtering for that capability, the author claims humanity would just be a species of lethargic, unambitious creatures.
So it's hanging around?
Basically. She uses the classic example of the peacock, actually.
Yeah.
The peacock doesn't grow his magnificent, ridiculous, heavy tail to dominate the peahen.
Right.
He grows it because she requires it for him to mate. She is the decision maker. He is just the eager candidate trying to pass the interview.
Pass the interview, I like that. But obviously, if you were a modern sociologist looking at this, you'd immediately push back, right? You'd say, hold on, human beings aren't peacocks.
Sure, yeah.
Our preferences are social scripts. Like, we are taught what to value by Disney movies, by capitalism, by the patriarchy.
And that is exactly the counterargument the author anticipates. So, to dismantle it, she brings in David Buss's seminal 1989 study.
Sex differences in human mate preferences.
That's the one. And we have to pause here to really understand the methodology of this study because it's so crucial to her argument.
Right, this wasn't just like a survey of 50 college freshmen in some American psychology class.
Not at all. Buss and his team surveyed over 10,000 people.
10,000.
Across 37 distinct cultures.
That is just a staggering logistical feat for 1989, like pre-internet.
Truly. I mean, we are talking about modern European cities, rural villages in Iran, indigenous tribes in South America, populations in Africa and Asia.
They went everywhere.
Yeah. The goal was to find out if human mating preferences change based on the local culture or if there is a universal baseline.
And what the book emphasizes is that the results completely obliterate the blank slate theory. The idea that we are born as blank pages, waiting for society to write our gender roles.
Right, because according to the data, in every single culture Buss studied, women valued resources, ambition, and industriousness in a mate significantly more than men did.
Without fail.
Without fail.
Yeah.
And conversely, in every single culture, men prioritized youth and physical attractiveness.
And the author argues these aren't capitalist constructs at all. They are universal evolutionary algorithms.
Right. Women seeking provision is basically an algorithm for offspring survival, and men seeking youth is an algorithm for reproductive value, which, biologically peaks in the late teens and early 20s.
Okay, but why? Why are those specific algorithms there in the first place?
That's the big question.
Yeah, and this is where I think the book's use of Robert Traver's 1972 parental investment theory is just so fascinating.
It's a great framework.
Let's really break this down, because I always think of this theory in terms of finance. It's like comparing a venture capitalist to a day trader.
That's actually a very apt way to look at it. Let's trace the biology on that.
Right, so Trevers points out the brutal biological inequality of human reproduction. The female biology acts like a venture capitalist. She has a very limited number of funds, meaning viable eggs.
Exactly.
And if she decides to invest, she is locking in her capital for a mandatory 9-month incubation period, followed by years of lactation, carrying, nurturing.
The physical toll and the risk to her own life are astronomical.
Huge. Because her investment is so high, she has to do intense due diligence. She must be ruthlessly choosy about her partner.
Well, male investment, biologically speaking, is the day trader.
Right.
High frequency, incredibly low initial investment. I mean, the biological requirement for a male to reproduce is literally just the few minutes it takes for copulation.
That's it.
He doesn't carry the child. He doesn't biologically have to nurse it.
Exactly. So Trevers' rule is simple. The sex that invests more in the offspring will inherently be choosier about mates. And the sex that invests less will compete more vigorously for access to the choosier sex. So he also argues that men are biologically designed to spread their genetics widely and compete for access, while women are designed to guard their reproductive capability, right, and demand a heavy investment of resources in return.
Which leads to this logical trap the author sets for modern social theory. She structures it as a syllogism.
Okay, walk us through it.
Point 1, evolution shapes physical traits. Men have higher upper body strength, women have wider hips for childbirth.
Pretty undeniable.
Right. Point 2, the brain is a physical organ made of neurons and chemicals, just like the heart or the liver.
Right.
Point 3, therefore, evolution shapes the brain. And point 4, therefore, men and women have different psychological instincts and cognitive priorities.
So she's boxing them in.
Basically, she asserts that arguing gender roles are entirely social constructs requires believing the brain is the only organ in the human body completely immune to the forces of evolution.
Which is a tough sell. And the book points to historical anthropological data to back this up, specifically looking at hunter-gatherer universals.
Yeah, the data is wild here.
The author cites a 1999 study using the standard cross-cultural sample. They examined known hunter-gatherer societies all across the globe and found that in 100% of them, without exception, men hunt and women gather.
Not 99%, 100.
100%. The book claims there is literally no record of a matriarchal hunting society anywhere in human history.
And to paint a picture of what this actually means on the ground, the text dives into the Ape people of Paraguay. They were studied by anthropologists Kim Hill and Magdalena Hurtado.
Right.
Among the Ape, the division of labor is incredibly stark. Men hunt high-risk game peccaries, monkeys, armadillos, and this isn't a sport, it is incredibly dangerous.
I can imagine.
The data shows this results in a mortality rate for adult men that is 15% higher than that of women.
Wait, 15%? Just from hunting?
Yes. From snake bites, falling out of trees, hunting accidents, jaguar attacks.
Wow.
The men are literally acting as a biological shield and a high-risk resource extraction team for the tribe.
While the women are doing what?
Meanwhile, women gather stable, low-risk calories, fruits, roots, larvae. The author argues this isn't some oppressive patriarchy. It's a brutal biological division of labor that kept the human species from going extinct.
Because the men bring the meat back.
Exactly. They routinely bring back large portions of their hard-earned meat and distribute it to the women and children. She also points to the Hadza people, studied by Frank Marlowe, where this exact same dynamic plays out. Men take on immense physical risk to provision the tribe.
But let me push back here for a second, because this is where my mind immediately goes when reading this section.
Sure.
The book aggressively contrasts this prehistoric reality with modern feminist complaints. Like, she takes aim at the concept of the invisible load.
Oh,
You know, if you're listening, the invisible load is that modern term for the exhausting emotional labor of managing a household. Remembering doctor's appointments, making sure you buy the toilet paper, all that.
right.
The author basically mocks this. She says, evolutionarily, the male mental load was calculating spear ballistics to kill a mammoth without being trampled to death so the tribe wouldn't starve.
High stakes.
Yeah, and the female mental load was remembering which berries were poisonous and maintaining social cohesion. But, I mean, isn't comparing modern domestic life to mammoth hunting a bit of an apples to oranges fallacy?
How so?
Well, nobody is fighting jaguars in a suburban cul-de-sac. How does the author bridge that massive gap in context?
Well, she bridges that gap by pointing out that our brains don't actually know we aren't fighting jaguars anymore.
Oh, interesting.
This is the core of evolutionary mismatch. Our stress responses, our dopamine receptors, our mating strategies, they were all adapted for the Pleistocene epoch. They were forged in a world of absolute scarcity and constant physical danger.
So they're just firing blindly now.
Exactly. The author argues that in a modern world of abundance, welfare states, and climate control departments, these ancient instincts go haywire. We are running that prehistoric operating system in a 21st century environment, and it is totally short-circuiting.
Okay, so if our brains are stuck on the savannah, how does the author explain the actual creation of modern society? Because human history didn't stop with hunter-gatherers, right?
No, just didn't.
We eventually stopped wandering, we planted crops, and we built walls. If men are just biologically wired to compete for mates, how do we get from competing with spears to building the Roman aqueducts or, the Manhattan skyline?
To answer that, the author moves us to the Neolithic shock. This occurred roughly between 10,000 BCE and 6,000 BCE.
Okay.
And the transition to agriculture wasn't some gentle egalitarian awakening where everyone sat in a circle and planted seeds. It was a brutal, backbreaking shift.
It sounds awful, honestly.
It required immense, sustained physical strength to chop down ancient forests, till unyielding soil without any modern machinery, and build permanent structures. The author argues the biological dice were rolled, and testosterone, pure brute force, became the foundational requirement for civilization.
And she lays out something she calls the syllogism of the wall, which she claims is airtight logic regarding how societies form.
Yeah, this is a major concept.
It goes like this: civilization requires settlement. Settlement creates a surplus of food and resources. That surplus immediately attracts raiders and predators, which requires defense.
Right.
Defense requires physical violence and lethality. Men, due to their evolutionary size and strength, possess a biological monopoly on lethal capacity.
They're the ones who can fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, male authority and male cooperation are the fundamental prerequisites for the existence of the city itself. Like, if men don't agree to stand on the wall and fight, the city burns.
And this leads directly to a historical separation of spheres. Modern theory often views the fact that women were kept in the home as a deliberate imprisonment. But the author completely flips this.
She sees it totally differently.
Right, she argues it was an entirely functional, highly sophisticated defensive strategy. The public sphere, from ancient Sumerian city-states to the Roman Forum, was designed by men, for men, to facilitate male cooperation in defense, politics, and commerce.
And the domestic sphere.
The inner sanctum was designed to protect women and children, who are the most biologically valuable and physically vulnerable members of the tribe, from a harsh, violent outside world.
Because if you lose half your men in a war, the population can still recover as long as the women survive.
Exactly.
But if you lose half your women, your tribe is functionally extinct.
Precisely. Biology dictates that women are the bottleneck of reproduction. So keeping them safe in the inner sanctum was a survival imperative, not some patriarchal conspiracy to deny them voting rights in ancient Mesopotamia.
Now, safety created surplus, and surplus created property. And the author claims this surplus and property necessitated the creation of the monogamous pair bond.
This is a huge shift.
Why? Because of inheritance and paternity. If a man is going to sacrifice his life standing on the wall and break his back plowing the fields, he needs a biological guarantee that his resources are going to his own genetic offspring.
This is a crucial pivot in the book's framework. The author argues that literally everything men build, skyscrapers, highways, electrical grids, sewage systems, the internet, is essentially an elaborate male mating display.
Wait, hold on. I want to make sure I'm tracking this. She's saying that a skyscraper, a feat of modern engineering, steel, and glass, is essentially the human equivalent of a peacock's feather.
Yes.
Just a giant concrete mating display.
She compares it directly to a bowerbird's nest. You know, the male bowerbird spends weeks meticulously building this complex, decorated structure out of twigs and blueberries solely to signal his resource capability and genetic fitness to females.
That is wild.
The author claims human civilization is no different. Men take on what she calls the glass cellar jobs. They work on deep-sea oil rigs, they maintain sewers, they die on battlefields, as a form of evolutionary sacrifice to impress, protect, and provide for women.
So they build the nest.
They build the nest, and the author claims modern feminists enjoy the unprecedented safety and comfort of this incredibly complex nest, while simultaneously despising the bird who built it.
Okay, let's play this analogy out to its logical conclusion then. If civilization is just an elaborate bowerbird nest built by men to attract women, what happens when the bird is told by the culture that his nest is toxic?
Right, what does he do?
What happens when he's told that his desire to build and protect is actually oppressive? Does the author believe men are simply going on strike?
According to the text, that strike isn't a future possibility. It is precisely what is happening right now. Men are dropping out of universities, the workforce, and family formation. But to understand why women are ostensibly rejecting the nest, and why this sudden rebellion is happening now, after thousands of years of human history, the biological lens isn't enough for the author.
So where does she go?
She argues we have to look at the subconscious mind. We have to dive into the giants of psychoanalysis.
Right. So we shift from Darwin to Freud. The book relies heavily on psychological frameworks to explain this modern phenomenon of Eve syndrome. And she starts by reinterpreting Sigmund Freud, specifically his highly controversial concept of penis envy.
Yes.
Now, Freud gets a lot of flack today, and understandably so.
He definitely does. And the author acknowledges that for a century, people have ridiculed this concept because they take it literally, assuming Freud meant women were literally jealous of male anatomy.
Right, which is just weird.
But the author suggests looking past the anatomical metaphor. In her view, what Freud actually identified was an existential, subconscious resentment regarding male biological freedom.
The freedom to walk away.
Precisely. Men possess the biological ability to impregnate and leave. They can completely avoid the massive, life-altering constraints of pregnancy, the physical toll of nursing, and the looming deadline of the biological clock.
And women can't.
Women are inextricably tethered to that reality. The author claims that modern feminism, rather than helping women navigate this reality, actually weaponizes this deep-seated resentment.
How so?
She argues feminism demands outcome equity like 50-50 representation in CEO roles, without accounting for the severe biological interruptions that women naturally face.
Right.
In the author's view, modern women envy the power and status that comes from male risk-taking, but they refuse the accountability and the physical sacrifices of manhood.
And the book points this lens directly at Betty Friedan and her seminal 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, which is widely considered the spark of second-wave feminism.
Yes, the foundational text.
And the author is absolutely unsparing here. She claims Friedan essentially globalized her own unresolved Electra complex.
Let's define that for our listeners really quick.
Yes, so for those who might not remember their Psych 101, the Electra complex is a neo-Freudian concept. It's essentially the idea of a daughter's subconscious psychosexual competition with her mother for her father's affection and approval.
And the book states that Friedan harbored a seething, unresolved hostility toward her father for failing to provide dominance, security, and a strong masculine presence in her early life.
So she projected that.
The author argues that Friedan projected that private psychological trauma onto the entire world. She took her personal resentment and codified it into a political vendetta against the nuclear family itself.
The author basically argues Friedan didn't liberate women, she just weaponized her own neurosis.
Exactly.
But the psychological analysis goes even deeper when she brings in Carl Jung. Jung introduced the concept of the animus, the inner masculine dimension within the subconscious of a woman.
Right.
In its healthy, integrated form, Jung said the animus acts as a guiding spirit of reason, logic, and logos. But the author argues that modern feminism has induced a mass psychological possession by what Jung called the negative animus.
The negative animus.
How does the book define that in a modern context?
It describes a possessed, hostile, and destructive masculine energy within a woman that actively severs her connection to her own feminine nature.
That sounds intense.
The author writes that this negative animus replaces her maternal instincts with the cold, unfeeling logic of a political commissar.
Wow.
It's an internal voice that whispers to her that she can define reality by her feelings alone, that biology doesn't matter, and that she can smash the patriarchy, the very structure providing her physical shelter and safety without any negative consequences.
And then we bring in Alfred Adler to round out this psychological profile. Adler focused on power dynamics and the inferiority complex. The book argues that feminism is a collective neurosis driven by a feminine inferiority complex that has actually mutated into a superiority complex.
Right. Adler talked extensively about Gemeinschaftsgefühl, a German term which translates to social interest or community cooperation. It's the drive to work together for the common good. The author claims feminism completely rejects this social interest because it relies on a zero-sum game fallacy. By framing every male success or male attribute as female oppression, it turns human interaction, and specifically marriage, into a hostile, constant negotiation for power rather than a collaborative partnership.
The book uses a fascinating hypothetical to explain how this actually plays out internally for a modern woman. She calls it the internalized feminist superego.
Yes, the Sarah example.
Let's picture Sarah. Sarah is a 32-year-old corporate professional. She's successful, independent. And if you're a woman listening to this while driving to your corporate job, the author is essentially arguing about your internal monologue here.
Yeah, it gets very personal.
The author says Sarah secretly finds deep, genuine fulfillment in traditional feminine roles, like cooking elaborate meals, organizing her home, and desiring submission to a strong, traditional partner who takes the lead.
But her internal voice, this internalized feminist superego that she's absorbed from the culture, berates her daily for these desires. It calls her brainwashed. It tells her that wanting a man to provide for her makes her weak or oppressed.
And the author claims this intense internal conflict, this cognitive dissonance of fighting one's own biological instincts, is directly responsible for the mass anxiety, depression, and just skyrocketing antidepressant usage among modern career women.
It's the exhaustion of pretending you aren't human.
Okay, but this raises a massive question for me. If Jung's negative animus is driving modern women to this destructive, anxious frenzy, what is driving the modern man in this framework?
That's fair to ask.
Like, is there a male equivalent, like a negative anima possession, or does the author see men purely as passive victims of this psychological shift? Are they just innocent bystanders?
The author does touch on male psychology, framing it primarily as a pathological reaction to this toxic environment. She calls it a pathology of submission, or the nice guy syndrome.
The nice guy syndrome, right?
Because men are constantly told their natural assertiveness is toxic, they advocate their traditional roles, hoping that being passive, agreeable, and harmless will somehow earn them affection.
That does it.
The author argues this backfires spectacularly. It forces women to wear a crown of leadership they biologically resent having to carry, creating a toxic loop of mutual contempt.
Oh, they're both miserable.
Exactly. Women resent the men for being weak, and the men resent the women for not rewarding their submission. So men aren't just victims. In the author's view, their retreat into passivity actively exacerbates the civilizational crisis.
But the author doesn't just blame individual psychology. He doesn't just say, everyone needs to read Jung and go to therapy. She points to a deliberate, organized subversion of these instincts by political forces.
Right, she goes macro.
She traces a historical timeline of ideological capture.
Oh.
She points the finger directly at Marxism.
Specifically, she traces the origin point to Friedrich Engels and his 1884 book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State.
Okay.
The author views this text as the foundational Marxist dogma that justified dismantling the nuclear family. Engels framed the traditional family not as a biological necessity or a bond of love, but as a capitalist property transaction.
Interesting.
He argued that marriage was just a way for men to exploit women's labor and ensure the transfer of private wealth.
The book claims this economic oppressor-oppressed model was intentionally metastasized into gender relations by the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism in the 20th century.
Right.
Now, to break that down, the argument is that Marxist intellectuals realized in the mid-1900s that they couldn't overthrow the West economically. Capitalism was just too resilient, the working class was too comfortable.
So they pivoted.
So they set out to subvert the West culturally. And the author claims they did this by deliberately weaponizing female instincts.
By convincing women that their natural instincts for motherhood, family, and cooperation were actually forms of oppression, they successfully replaced partnership with resentment.
To illustrate the very real dangers of applying Marxist theory to the family, the author points to a specific historical cautionary tale. The Soviet Union in the 1920s, immediately following the Bolshevik Revolution.
This part is wild.
The early Soviets made a massive push to destroy the nuclear family, viewing it as a bourgeois institution. They legalized abortion, made divorce incredibly easy, and pushed for radical sexual liberation, assuming the state would just step in to raise the children collectively.
And what happened?
According to the book, the social collapse was instantaneous and terrifying. It resulted in the Bezprizorny.
The Bezprizorny.
Yeah, these were feral gangs of millions of abandoned orphan children roaming the streets of Russian cities, engaging in violent crime, prostitution, and just starving to death.
Feral gangs. That is unbelievable.
The social fabric unraveled so fast that by the 1930s, Joseph Stalin, a man not exactly known for his traditional conservatism, was forced to completely reverse course.
He had to walk it back.
He had to reinstate traditional family values, make divorce difficult again, and severely restrict abortion, just to keep the entire society from imploding. The author uses this to say, look, we've run this experiment before, and it ends in feral children and societal collapse.
And the author argues this same ideological capture is happening in our modern institutions today, just with more sophisticated PR. Let's look at the education system. The book uses a very provocative term here, the Ritalin Stasi.
The Ritalin Stasi.
Man. Yes. She claims that the modern education establishment, which is overwhelmingly dominated by female teachers, has created an environment that demands sedentary compliance.
Sit still, be quiet.
Sit still, be quiet, don't roughhouse. This environment is completely antithetical to male evolutionary biology, which requires movement, competition, and risk.
Right, boys are active.
Exactly. And when young boys naturally act out against this confinement, the system pathologizes normal boyish behavior as ADHD. The author claims boys are drugged with amphetamines like Ritalin at 3 times the rate of girls, essentially to biologically suppress their masculine energy and force them to act docile.
She also critiques modern STEM initiatives, the push for girls in STEM. She labels this a grift of astronomical proportions.
A grift!
Yeah. The author's argument here is that the system ignores the fact that women already drastically outpace men in overall university enrollments and graduate degrees. Yet millions of dollars are poured into extracting resources to push women into the few remaining male-dominated sectors, like engineering, while completely ignoring the crisis of male dropouts.
She takes similar aim at college campuses, specifically focusing on Title IX. She claims Title IX has mutated far beyond its original intent, which was just a statute to ensure equal sports funding, into a star chamber.
A star chamber being a historical term for a secret, arbitrary court with no due process.
Exactly. The author argues that campus tribunals handle sexual assault allegations by completely eliminating due process for men. The presumption of innocence, which is a cornerstone of Western law, is replaced by the ideological mantra "believe all women," transforming Title IX into a totalitarian tool that expels young men based on mere accusation.
This all culminates in what the author calls the host-body syllogism. This is a fascinating way to frame it.
Yeah, it really ties it together.
It's the argument that feminism acts as an ideological parasite. It requires a functional, high-trust, heavily industrialized, patriarchal society, the host body to leech from.
Right.
The host provides the physical safety, the electrical grid, the paved roads, and the surplus resources. The author argues that feminism only works, and can only exist, when men are still willing to do the dirty work of building and protecting.
But once the ideology successfully demonizes masculinity and destroys the host's motivation to maintain the infrastructure, the entire system collapses. The parasite kills the host and dies with it.
But let me play devil's advocate on this timeline for a second. The book traces this subversion back to the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 and Engels in 1884.
That's a long time ago.
It is. If this parasitic subversion has been happening for nearly 2 centuries, why does the author believe we are only hitting the true breaking point right now? Why didn't the host body collapse in 1950 or 1980 or 2005.
The author's response to that is found in the data lag. She points out that the true breaking point is only becoming undeniable now because it takes generations for the demographic and economic consequences of these massive ideological shifts to fully manifest.
So it's a slow burn.
Exactly. A society can run on the fumes of its previous cultural capital for a long time. But she argues we are now finally seeing the cold, hard statistics that prove the engine has stopped and the system is crashing.
And that brings us directly into the author's analysis of modern demographics and societal demise. The author paints a stark, uncompromising picture of modern reality. And we need to reiterate to you, the listener, that these are the author's deeply controversial interpretations of demographic data.
Yes, very important to note.
She starts with what she calls the abortion pandemic.
Right. The book cites that since the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973, there have been over 63 million abortions in the U.S. and over 1 billion globally since 1980.
A billion.
Yes. Now, while mainstream culture often frames abortion as a matter of healthcare or bodily autonomy, the author frames it entirely differently. She points to movements like Shout Your Abortion, where women are encouraged to celebrate their terminations on social media as the ultimate peak of the negative animus.
She describes it as a literal death cult, a hostility toward life itself, masking the psychological suppression of the maternal instinct with performative bravery.
She also takes aim at Planned Parenthood's $1.6 billion annual revenue, framing the entire industry as a financial agreement with civilizational nihilism.
The book also aggressively tackles the wage gap myth, the claim that women make 77 cents for every dollar a man makes.
Right, we've all heard that.
The author uses Department of Labor data to argue that the gender wage gap entirely evaporates when you control for variables like hours worked, career choices, and most importantly, dangerous jobs. She points out that men account for approximately 90% of all workplace fatalities.
90%.
90%. She calls this a blood tax that men pay to keep civilization running. Men are the deep-sea welders, the oil rig workers, the loggers, the roofers.
So it's not discrimination, it's hazard pay.
Exactly. The author argues that capitalism pays for risk, physical destruction of the body, and time away from home, not just mere existence. When you account for the blood tax, the wage gap disappears completely.
Furthermore, the text addresses biological betrayals that undermine the evolutionary social contract. Specifically, the book cites data on cuckoldry, or paternity fraud.
Yeah.
The author states there is a 1 to 3% paternity fraud rate across cultures, meaning 1 to 3% of men are unknowingly raising children that are not genetically there.
Which is huge in an evolutionary context.
The author views this not just as a personal betrayal, but as a direct violation of the evolutionary trust required for men to invest their labor into family structures.
Which leads us directly into one of the most explosive parts of the book, her analysis of the manosphere and the incel revolt.
This is where she really diverges from the mainstream.
Yeah. Her take here is quite different from the mainstream media narrative. The mainstream views the incel community, involuntary celibates, as a hive of toxic villains and potential terrorists. The author, however, views them as the tragic casualties of the sexual revolution.
She uses the concept of unleashed hypergamy. Hypergamy being the biological drive for women to mate with men of higher status than themselves.
Right.
The author argues that before the digital age, this was constrained by local geography and social monogamy. But with dating apps like Tinder, hypergamy has been weaponized on a global scale.
Because everyone is in the same pool.
Exactly. She argues that women are biologically driven to seek the highest status males, and Tinder allows them to all swipe on the exact same small pool of men. This results in the top 20% of men, the so-called chads, hoarding all the sexual access.
Consequently, the bottom 80% of men are rendered evolutionarily useless. The mathematics of the mating market exclude them completely. Recognizing they have no stake in the future, they don't revolt with violence, they check out entirely.
They just walk away.
They retreat into video games, pornography, and screens. The author compares this to the herbivore man phenomenon in Japan. Young men who have zero interest in career advancement or marriage.
The author views a massive surplus of uninvested, isolated, angry young men as a catastrophic societal risk. If they won't build the nest and they won't stand on the wall, the city falls.
The book also critiques modern relationship trends attempting to replace traditional marriage, like polyamory and ethical non-monogamy. She calls them a satanic inversion of intimacy.
Drawing on evolutionary psychologist David Buss again, she argues these practices destroy the pair bond essential for raising offspring.
Right.
She claims polyamory encourages women to trade long-term security for short-term pleasure during their peak fertility years, ultimately leaving them abandoned when their reproductive value declines.
To highlight the demographic consequences of all this, the author contrasts the secular declining birth rates of the West with the Amish anomaly.
The Amish anomaly.
Yeah. The Amish are a traditionalist Christian group who retain strict gender essentialism and unapologetically patriarchal structures. As a result, they have an 85% retention rate among their youth, and they double their population every 20 years.
Every 20 years? That's insane.
It is. The author uses this to argue a brutal Darwinian point societies that adhere to traditional gender roles outbreed and replace those that indulge in what she calls the ideological lie of gender fluidity. It's just a matter of math.
But wait, I have to ask this because it feels like a glaring contradiction in the text.
Go for it.
The author claims the bottom 80% of men are just checking out entirely, rotting in front of screens, playing Call of Duty. But if men are biologically hardwired to compete, to conquer, and to provide, as Darwin and Buss suggest, wouldn't facing severe adversity in the mating market make them compete harder?
That's a good point.
Shouldn't they be working 3 jobs, hitting the gym, and striving to reach that top 20%? Why are they just unplugging the console instead of trying to win the game?
The author answers that with a concept she calls the misandry double bind. Men are caught in a psychological and cultural trap.
Okay, what is a bind?
If a man lacks traditional masculinity, if he's sensitive, agreeable, and passive, he is biologically rejected by women and shamed as a weak loser or a simp. But if he acts too masculine, if he's assertive, dominant, fiercely competitive, and ambitious, he is culturally demonized as toxic, oppressive, and part of the patriarchy.
So it's a trap. It's like men are playing a video game where both the attack button and the defend button result in an automatic game over.
Exactly. This double bind paralyzes men. They retreat because the societal incentives for male striving have been completely replaced by legal and cultural punishments. Why build the nest if you'll be punished for how you built it and then have it taken away from you anyway?
Which leads directly to the book's proposed solutions. If the system is crashing, how do we fix it?
Right. How do we pull out of the nosedive? Section 6 is all about reclaiming the sacred order. Her path forward is a radical, uncompromising return to what she calls adaptive truth and biological reality.
The author argues that hierarchy is not inherently oppressive. It is simply nature's way of organizing complex systems for survival. She delves into the spiritual dimension here, offering a highly specific interpretation of Ephesians 5 from the Bible, the infamous verse instructing wives to submit to their husbands.
Which is obviously a massive flashpoint. I mean, if you bring that verse up at a dinner party today, you are asking for a fight.
Huge flashpoint. But the author argues this verse is historically and psychologically misunderstood by the modern feminist hive mind as an instruction for tyranny.
So what does she think it means?
She claims it was actually an ancient, sophisticated psychological safety valve. It was designed to deliberately curb the negative animus, that bitter projection of resentment and control we discussed earlier. Furthermore, she argues it was meant to relieve women of the exhausting, unnatural burden of having to be hyper-vigilant, independent providers all the time. It gives them permission to rest in the security of a male protector.
The book illustrates this by contrasting 2 modern archetypes. On one side, you have the modern slutwalk participant. The author claims this archetype seeks empowerment through victimhood, the public exploitation of her own sexuality, and degrading herself to prove a political point.
And on the other side?
On the other side, she presents the Proverbs 31 woman. Now, the author stresses that this biblical figure isn't a passive, voiceless doormat.
Right, that's a common misconception.
The Proverbs 31 woman manages a large household. She engages in real estate and commerce. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she is revered within the household hierarchy for her industry and character. But her strength is channeled into the family unit, not positioned against it.
To achieve this civilizational shift back to the Proverbs 31 model, the author demands concrete legal changes, and her primary talent is the reversal of no-fault divorce.
Which was introduced in California in 1969, signed into law by Ronald Reagan.
Yes. The text claims no-fault divorce was the legislative killshot to the nuclear family. It fundamentally breaks the social contract.
Because you can just leave for any reason.
By allowing a marriage to be dissolved for any reason or no reason at all, the author argues it incentivizes the destruction of the family. It turns marriage from a binding, lifelong covenant designed to protect children into a temporary, fragile arrangement that is easily dissolved by the fleeting whims of female hypergamy or emotional dissatisfaction.
Ultimately, the author sees this entire crisis not just as a political shift, but as a profound spiritual awakening. It's the realization that the biological and psychological differences between men and women are not oppressive obstacles to be overcome by social engineering. They are sacred features of divine and evolutionary design meant to be celebrated.
She calls for men to step up and lead because they biologically bear the burden of cosmic risk required to sustain life. And she calls for women to embrace their roles as mothers and moral stewards. She believes this return to essentialism is the only way to stabilize the ship before it hits the iceberg.
But she uses some very aggressive language when advising men on how to lead this reclamation. The book calls for men to break the nice guy syndrome and explicitly says a man must be the monster she needs, not the doormat she walks over.
Be the monster.
Yeah. Now, how does the author reconcile this aggressive, dominant framing, being a monster, with the ultimate goal of stable, harmonious, loving family building?
Well, the author would likely argue that being the monster doesn't mean being abusive, cruel, or tyrannical. It means embodying the capacity for primal strength, danger, and firm boundary setting that she believes women biologically crave for security.
Like a sheepdog.
Exactly. Think of a sheepdog. It has to be a monster to the wolf to protect the flock. She argues that women deeply biologically despise submissive men, and that true marital harmony is only achieved when the man is strong enough and unyielding enough to contain the chaos of the negative animus. He has to be strong enough to say no.
Wow. It is a dense, provocative, and highly controversial framework. It challenges literally every assumption of modern sociology. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. We've covered everything from jaguar attacks in Paraguay to the corporate boardrooms of today.
There's a lot to process.
And if the author is right, if our psychological hardware truly hasn't had a software update since the Pleistocene epoch, it raises a massive question for you to mull over as you go about your day.
What's the question?
Is any attempt at modern social engineering, egalitarianism, or blurring of gender roles doomed to eventually crash the system? Or are humans uniquely capable of using our advanced cognition to outthink our own biology?
It's the ultimate question of nature versus nurture, played out on a civilizational scale. Are we bound by the savannah, or can we build something new?
If you found this breakdown fascinating and you want to grapple with the source material for yourself, whether you agree with it or want to challenge it, you absolutely must check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Subversion of Female Instincts, Eve Syndrome, and The Recurring Fall by Sophie Marie Eve Riker.
And be sure to follow the creator, at Conrad Riker, on Substack for a lot more content exploring these ideas.
Final reminder, please like and subscribe to the show. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives. Thanks for listening.